I thought I was finally free the morning I signed those papers. I thought the worst was behind me, the quiet cruelty, the small humiliations, the years of swallowing words that burned on their way down. I thought signing my name on that dotted line was the end of something. I had no idea it was only the beginning. Because while the ink was still drying on my divorce papers, my mother-in-law, Brenda Calloway, was already on the phone with her florist. She didn't waste a single hour grieving the marriage she had spent 7 years trying to destroy. By the time I was sitting alone in my car in the parking lot of my attorney's office, hands still trembling, mascara doing its best and failing, Brenda was reserving a private dining room at Magnolia House, the most expensive restaurant in the city, to celebrate. She had invited the entire family, cousins, aunts, her church friends, the neighbors she had never once introduced me to in 7 years. She stood at the head of that table and introduced a woman named Melissa, young, soft-spoken, already wearing a ring, as the woman God always intended for my son. And she paid for the entire banquet on my credit card, the card she didn't know I had already canceled. I found out about the banquet the same way I found out about most things in that marriage, too late and through someone who wasn't supposed to tell me. My cousin Diane called me while I was still sitting in that parking lot, voice low like she was reporting from a war zone. "Clara," she said, "are you somewhere you can talk?" I looked at the divorce papers sitting on the passenger seat, my married name crossed out in pen by my own hand. "I'm somewhere I can scream," I said. "Will that work?" She told me everything, and by the time she finished, my hands weren't trembling anymore. They were perfectly, dangerously still. Let me take you back to where this really started, because the ending, the banquet, the new bride, the blocked card, the phone call that broke me open and then put me back together stronger than I'd ever been, none of it makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning, like most disasters, looked nothing like a disaster at all. It looked like a Sunday morning. It looked like sunlight through the kitchen window of the house on Elmwood Drive, the one with the wraparound porch and the peeling blue shutters that I had repainted myself the first summer we moved in. It looked like Marcus, standing at the stove in his old college sweatshirt, making the too-strong coffee he always made, and that I always drank anyway, and the smell of it filling the whole downstairs like something warm and permanent. I was 31 years old. I had a job I loved, senior account manager at a mid-sized marketing firm, the kind of position I had worked toward for 6 years without ever asking anyone to hand it to me. I had a house I had bought mostly on my own income, with a modest inheritance from my grandmother woven into the down payment like a quiet blessing. I had a husband who, in those early years, had looked at me like I was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. I had, in other words, everything that was supposed to make a woman feel safe. What I also had, and this I understood only in retrospect, the way you only understand the shape of a trap after your leg is already in it, was a mother-in-law who had decided, approximately 6 weeks after our wedding, that I was a problem to be solved. Brenda Calloway was 63 years old, a retired school administrator, and the kind of woman who moved through rooms with the precision of someone who had mapped the territory in advance. She was not loud. She was never loud. That was the thing people always got wrong about her. The women you need to watch are not the ones who shout. They're the ones who smile and say, "Of course, dear," and then go home and make 3 phone calls that quietly rearrange your life while you're sleeping. Brenda had silver hair she wore in a careful chignon. She wore blazers in neutral colors and small pearl earrings, and she smelled like a department store perfume counter, always the same scent, something floral and powdery and slightly suffocating, the kind that lingers long after the person is gone. She called me dear in a tone that managed to make the word feel like a diagnosis. In the early days, I told myself I was imagining it. Marcus would give me that look. Patient, slightly tired, the look of a man who has spent his whole life managing the weather of someone else's moods, and say, "She's just old-fashioned. She doesn't mean anything by it." And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Believing him was easier than accepting the alternative, which was that I had married into a war I didn't know was already in progress, and that I was losing. The house on Elmwood Drive had been my anchor. 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, a garden in the back that I planted with my own hands every spring. Tomatoes, basil, a climbing rose along the fence that took 3 years to really take hold, but was glorious when it did. The mortgage was primarily in my name. I had made the down payment. I had chosen the paint colors and negotiated with the contractors when the kitchen needed replumbing, and stayed home from work twice to meet the electrician. It was mine, in the way that only the things you have truly earned feel like yours, not just legally, but in your bones. Brenda never once referred to it as Clara and Marcus's house. She called it Marcus's house. Always. In 7 years, without a single exception. And I corrected her, at first gently, and then less gently, and then not at all. Because some battles drain you before you even understand what you're fighting for. Marcus grew up in a small house 40 minutes from the city, the only child of Brenda and a man named Gerald who had died of a heart attack when Marcus was 19. I think Gerald's death had done something to both of them, had tightened the cord between mother and son, until it wasn't a cord anymore but a leash, and neither of them could tell which one was holding it. Marcus was generous and funny and genuinely kind in most situations, and he was also, when it came to his mother, a man without a spine. Not because he was weak exactly. He was capable of enormous strength in other areas of his life. But where Brenda was concerned, he became a boy again, a boy who needed to keep the peace at any cost, including costs he hadn't calculated because they weren't coming out of his account. They were coming out of mine. The first time I noticed the questions, really noticed them, not just filed them away as Brenda being Brenda, was about 2 years into the marriage. We had been over for Sunday dinner, the standing weekly obligation that had started as a sweet tradition and slowly calcified into something I dreaded from approximately Thursday onward. Brenda had made roast chicken, which she always made, as though cooking the same meal on rotation was a form of reliability. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and roasting fat and the faint chemical undertone of whatever she cleaned her counters with, something antibacterial and aggressive that she applied, I was convinced, as a territorial marker. We were clearing the table when she asked, very casually, with her back to me as she stacked plates, "Clara, when you bought the house, what kind of mortgage did you end up with? Fixed rate?" I remember the specific texture of the moment, the clink of silverware, the low sound of the television in the next room, Marcus carrying the bread basket to the counter and not looking up. "Fixed rate, yes," I said, because it was a harmless question on its surface, and I had not yet learned to treat harmless surfaces with suspicion. She turned and smiled at me. "And the deed, is that both your names or just yours since you made the larger payment?" I put down the glass I was holding very carefully. "Both our names," I said. "Of course," she said. "Of course. I just always think it's so sensible to keep these things clear. For both parties." She patted my arm once and went back to the sink. "More wine, dear?" I looked at Marcus. He was looking at the bread basket. He had a very detailed relationship with that bread basket in the moments when I needed him to make eye contact. I should have asked more questions that night. I should have sat down at the kitchen table when we got home and said, "Marcus, your mother just asked about our mortgage over Sunday chicken. Can you explain to me why that's a normal thing?" But I didn't. I poured myself the wine I had been offered, and I told myself I was paranoid, and I went to bed. That is the thing about being gaslit over a long period of time. You do the gaslit person's job for them. You convince yourself before they even have to try. The questions continued, spaced out enough that each one seemed isolated, each one explainable on its own. Over the following months, Brenda asked about our savings account. Just wondering if you use the same bank, for simplicity. She asked about the title on my car. She asked about the terms of my employment contract, framing it as interest in my career. She asked Marcus, within my earshot but not to me directly, what would happen to the house in a worst-case scenario. She said, worst-case scenario. She said it the way you say it when you've already considered several possible scenarios and ranked them by outcome. I started sleeping badly, Not dramatically, no nightmares, no insomnia that announced itself as such. Just a new habit of waking at 3 in the morning with a chest full of something dense and unnameable, staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept beside me, his breathing deep and steady and completely undisturbed. There were other things, smaller things, that I cataloged without realizing I was cataloging them. The way Brenda began showing up at the house unannounced more frequently, always with something, a Tupperware of leftovers, a casserole, a plant she had divided from her garden, always with a reason, but she would move through the rooms on those visits with a proprietorial ease that made the back of my neck prickle. Opening the refrigerator without asking, standing in the doorway of the second bedroom, which I used as a home office, and looking at it with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not nostalgia exactly, more like assessment. Once, I came downstairs to find her at my desk. She was not touching anything. She was simply standing there, with her hands clasped in front of her, looking at the shelves of files I kept, mortgage statements, insurance papers, the contracts from when we'd had the roof replaced. She turned when she heard me on the stairs and smiled her department store perfume smile and said, "I was just admiring how organized you are, dear." She was gone before I could process whether that required a response. That night, I moved the files to a locked box in my closet. Marcus, when I told him, said, "Mom's just curious. She grew up in a generation where they kept everything in shoeboxes. She probably thinks folders are impressive." "She was looking at our mortgage statements," I said. "She wasn't touching them." Marcus. "Clara." He said my name the way he said it when he thought I was spiraling, with a faint undercurrent of exhaustion. "You're reading into things again." I want to be precise about this moment because it matters. I want you to understand what "you're reading into things again" does to a person when it is said often enough by someone whose good opinion you depend on. It doesn't silence you immediately. It works slowly, the way water works on stone, not breaking it, but wearing it, smoothing away the edges of your certainty until you can no longer feel where your instincts end and your overreaction begins. I stopped telling Marcus about the things I noticed, and Brenda, I would later understand, had been counting on exactly that. The year everything cracked open started like the ones before it. January, gray and cold, the climbing rose cut back to its winter skeleton. Marcus's birthday in February, the usual dinner out, Brenda invited as always, my work performance review in March. Excellent, as always, with a note from my director about the possibility of a promotion to regional director by the end of the fiscal year. I came home and told Marcus over dinner. He kissed my forehead and said he was proud of me. Brenda, when we told her the following Sunday, tilted her head and said, "More responsibility, more pressure. I hope you won't let it affect your health, dear, or your marriage." She smiled. Ambition is wonderful, of course, in the right doses. I counted to 4 inside my head and asked if anyone wanted more chicken. The promotion came through in April. It was everything I had worked for, a new title, a team of 12 reporting to me, and a salary increase that was significant enough that Marcus and I had a real conversation about paying off the mortgage early. I remember that conversation specifically. We were sitting on the back porch on a Saturday evening, and the climbing rose was just starting to bud, small, tight fists of pink along the fence, and the light was long and golden, and I thought, This is the life I built. This is what all those early mornings and late nights were for. I did not know that across the city, in her tidy house with the blue shutters she had chosen herself, Brenda Calloway was making phone calls. I did not know that one of the people she was calling was a real estate attorney. I did not know that another was my husband. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday in May. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had a team meeting at 9 and a client call at 2, and I had been up since 6 going over quarterly projections, and the day had that particular quality of fullness that I had come to associate with the life I was building. Busy, purposeful, mine. I was at the kitchen counter with my second coffee when Marcus came downstairs, already dressed, already wearing his jacket, which was unusual for a Tuesday morning when he normally worked from home until noon. Early meeting? I asked without looking up from my laptop. Something came up, he said. He opened the refrigerator, stood in front of it for a moment without taking anything, and closed it again. I might be late tonight. How late? Not sure. He kissed the top of my head, a brief, distracted kiss, the kind that lands without really landing. Don't wait on dinner. He was out the door before I thought to ask where he was going. I told myself it was work. Marcus was a project manager for a commercial construction firm, and something came up was a perfectly ordinary explanation in his profession. I closed the quarterly projections and opened my meeting notes and did not think about it again for approximately 6 hours, which is exactly how long it took for the first piece of the picture to fall into place. It fell into place in the parking garage of my office building, of all the unremarkable places for a life to begin its unraveling. I was walking to my car after the client call ran long, later than I had planned, the parking garage dim and smelling of exhaust and concrete. I was on the phone with Diane, we talked on the drive home sometimes just to decompress, when I saw Marcus's car on the lower level, which was strange because Marcus had no reason to be anywhere near my office building. His firm's offices were on the opposite side of the city. I stopped walking. Diane was saying something about her own day, and I said, "Hold on a second." And I stood there looking at the car, his gray Accord, the one with the dent on the rear bumper from the parking lot incident he had never gotten fixed. And I felt a cool, quiet wrongness settle into my stomach. I did not go to the car. I told myself there was probably an explanation, and there probably was, and it probably wasn't any explanation I wanted to find at 6 o'clock in a parking garage with a client call barely finished. I went to my own car on the upper level, and I drove home, and I made pasta from whatever was in the refrigerator, and I ate it alone at the kitchen table. Marcus came home at 8:30. He said the meeting had gone long. He said they'd had to drive out to the site. He said it in the easy, confident tone of someone who has prepared an answer. And I looked at his face, the face I had been looking at for 7 years, the face I thought I knew better than my own. And I said, "What site?" "The Grayfield project," he said, without hesitating. "Why?" "No reason," I said. "I'm just tired." He sat down across from me and ate the pasta I had left warm for him and told me about a podcast he had listened to on the drive. And I watched him talk and I thought, he is a good actor. Or I am a bad detective. Possibly both. I lay awake that night until well past midnight. The house was quiet, the way old houses are quiet. Not silent, but breathing, settling, making the small sounds of a structure at rest. Marcus slept. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the parking garage and the dented bumper and the too smooth answer about the Grayfield project. And somewhere in the middle of that long, dark hour, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to stop dismissing myself. I started paying attention. Attention, when you finally give it properly, is a staggering thing. It is almost embarrassing how much you can see when you stop being afraid of what you'll find. Over the next 3 weeks, I began to notice that Marcus was leaving the house early, or coming home late, approximately 2 to 3 times per week, always with explanations, always plausible, never verifiable without effort. I noticed that his phone, which he had never been secretive about before, was now always face down on surfaces and always taken into the bathroom with him. I noticed that he had begun paying for certain things in cash, which Marcus never did. He was a credit card for everything person, had been for as long as I had known him. I noticed that Brenda called him more frequently than usual, and that when he answered her calls in my presence, he would walk out of the room within 30 seconds. I noticed that the Sunday dinners had acquired a new quality, a mild, constant tension, like a wire pulled just slightly too tight, that none of us acknowledged directly. Brenda was warmer to me than usual in those weeks, which should have been reassuring, and instead made every hair on my arm stand up. She asked about my job with genuine-seeming interest. She refilled my wine glass before I asked. She said, "Clara, I hope you know that whatever happens, you will always be important to this family." And I said, "Of course, Brenda," and smiled. And on the drive home, I sat in complete silence for 11 minutes while Marcus talked about traffic. Whatever happens. I turned that phrase over in my mind for days. Whatever happens. Not whatever comes up or whatever life brings. Whatever happens. The phrasing of someone who knows something is already in motion. The second piece of the picture arrived on a Saturday afternoon in late May, and it arrived absurdly because of a printer error. I was working from home, finishing a report I needed to send by Monday, and my printer ran out of ink halfway through. I went to the small supply closet off the hallway, the one where we kept extra printer cartridges, light bulbs, the general domestic detritus of a functioning household. And on the shelf where the printer cartridges should have been, I found a manila folder. This was not unusual in itself. We kept folders in that closet sometimes, overflow from the home office. But this folder was new, pristine, unbent, the kind of crisp newness that means it had been placed there recently. And it was labeled, in handwriting that was not mine and not Marcus's, in a precise, backward slanting script I recognized immediately. It was Brenda's handwriting. The folder was labeled Property Assessment, Elmwood Drive. I stood in that closet for a long moment, the door half open, the light from the hallway falling across the folder in my hands. My first thought was completely mundane. I thought about the ink cartridges, the report I still needed to print, the Monday deadline. My mind offered me this small, ordinary concern like a life raft, and part of me wanted to take it. Instead, I opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a printed property assessment for the house on Elmwood Drive, a professional appraisal dated 6 weeks earlier, estimating the current market value of the property. The second was a printed page of what appeared to be notes, typed, not handwritten, that I initially could not make sense of, a list of numbers and dates and abbreviations that my brain refused to parse in the first 30 seconds of looking at them. The third was a single-page document that I recognized, in a slow and nauseating way, as a partial draft of something I had never seen before and had never signed. It was a quitclaim deed. For my house, with my name and the transferring line. I sat down on the floor of the supply closet, not deliberately. My legs simply made a unilateral decision, and the floor came up to meet me, and I sat there with the folder in my lap and the appraisal and the draft deed spread across the linoleum, and the only thought I was capable of forming was very small and very clear. She was at my desk looking at my files, and I moved them to a locked box, and she still got a property appraisal, which meant someone had let the appraiser in, someone who had a key. Marcus came home at 4:30 to find me sitting at the kitchen table with the folder in front of me and a glass of water I had not touched. He came through the back door, the way he always did, and said something about traffic and stopped when he saw my face. "Clara," he said. I turned the folder to face him. I watched him look at it. I watched the specific sequence of expressions that moved across his face. Surprise first, then something that was not quite guilt but was guilt's close relative, then the careful assembly of a neutral expression that arrived about 2 seconds too late to be convincing. "Where did you find that?" he said. "In the supply closet," I said. "Behind the printer cartridges." I paused. "Which I went looking for because your mother's handwriting was on a folder in our house." He sat down across from me. He put his elbows on the table and his face in his hands, and for a moment he said nothing, and the kitchen clock ticked with a clarity I had never noticed before, loud and metronomic, each second precisely separated from the last. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to explain to me why there is a draft quitclaim deed for this house in our supply closet." It's not what it looks like," he said, to his own hands. "Then tell me what it is." He looked up. His eyes were tired in a way I hadn't noticed before, or had noticed and attributed to work, to stress, to the general fatigue of adult life. "Mom has been worried," he said, "about security, about what would happen if things didn't work out, for both of us. She just wanted to have something prepared, just in case." "A quitclaim deed," I said. "Prepared, just in case." "She wasn't going to use it without what, Marcus? Without my signature? Because I notice my signature isn't on it. I tapped the page. I noticed the space where my signature goes is blank, which means either she was planning to ask me to sign something I would never voluntarily sign, or she was planning to put my signature there herself. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that kitchen. Marcus did not deny it. He said, "She loves this family, Clara. She does things in a way that isn't always right, but she—" "Did you know about this?" I said. He looked at the table. "Marcus, did you know about this?" "She talked to me about it," he said quietly, "a few months ago. She wanted to know if I thought it was a good idea. I told her it wasn't. I told her to drop it." "But you didn't tell me." "I thought she had dropped it. She had a property appraiser in this house," I said. "Someone with a key let them in. Was that you?" He said nothing for 4 seconds. I counted them. "She asked me to let the appraiser in while you were at work," he said. "She said it was just for insurance purposes. I didn't ask what she actually needed it for." I stood up from the table. I was very careful about it. I pushed the chair back, and I stood, and I picked up the folder, and I held it against my chest with both hands, and I breathed. "You let someone into our house," I said, "to assess the value of a property that is primarily in my name, for your mother, without telling me, and you didn't think to ask why. Clara, I need you to not speak to me right now," I said. "I mean that gently. I need you to be quiet, and I need to think." I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed in our room, and I looked at the folder, and I thought about the years of small dismissals, the questions about the mortgage, the desk, the files, the whatever happens, and I felt something shift inside me. Not dramatically, not with heat. It shifted the way a tectonic plate shifts, slowly, enormously, and with the kind of finality that changes the shape of everything above it. That night I called Diane. I did not call her to cry, although I did cry, briefly, in the way you cry when you are mostly too angry to cry, but your body insists on it anyway. I called her because Diane was the most practically minded person I knew, and what I needed was not comfort. What I needed was a plan. "You need a lawyer," she said, before I had finished explaining. "I know. Not just any lawyer. A property lawyer who also handles family law. Tonight, Clara, not next week." "It's Saturday night." "Monday morning then, first thing, and in the meantime," I heard her thinking, the particular quality of Diane's silence when she was working through a problem. "You still have joint accounts with Marcus?" "Yes." "Any accounts that are solely yours?" I thought about the savings account I had opened 3 years ago, after my first major bonus. A personal account, my name only, where I deposited a portion of each bonus as what I privately called my breathing room fund. I had told Marcus about it in the abstract sense of, we both have separate savings, but he had never asked the details. "1," I said. "Good," said Diane. "Move everything you can into it, tonight, and screenshot every joint account balance before you do." I did not move everything. I moved enough. I was careful and precise, and I documented everything I moved and why. Because even then, even at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, sitting on the bedroom floor while my husband slept 2 rooms away, I understood that I was not just protecting myself from Brenda. I was preparing for the possibility that I was protecting myself from Marcus, too. The lawyer's name was Patricia Holt, and she was everything I needed her to be. Sharp, unhurried, and completely unimpressed by the folder and its contents. Not because it wasn't serious, but because she had seen worse. "The quitclaim deed draft is concerning, but not actionable on its own," she said, spreading the documents across her desk with the careful efficiency of someone who arranges evidence for a living. "It's a draft. Anyone can draft a deed. What matters is whether any attempt was made to forge your signature or file it without your consent." She looked up at me over her reading glasses. "Has anything been filed?" "I don't know yet." "We'll check." She made a note. "The property appraisal is more interesting to me, actually. Who commissioned it?" "I don't know that either." "We'll find out." She set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Calloway, Clara, I want to be honest with you. What you've described is a pattern, not a single incident, a sustained pattern of information gathering about your assets by someone who is not on the deed, conducted with the probable assistance of your husband over a period of what sounds like several years. I said, yes, that's what it is. Which means, she said, that this is not going to resolve with a conversation. I know, I said. Good. She picked up her pen again. Then let's talk about what you're going to do. Patricia Holt gave me 3 things before I left her office that Monday morning. The first was a list of actions, specific, ordered, with deadlines. The second was a referral to a forensic accountant she worked with regularly, a quiet man named Gerald Sims, who specialized in tracing financial movements in domestic disputes. The third was something less tangible, but more valuable than either. She gave me back my own clarity. Sitting across from a woman who looked at the facts without flinching and said, "This is a pattern." That was the first time in years that I felt the ground solidly beneath my feet again. Not comfort, not reassurance, just reality, named plainly, which is sometimes the most steadying thing in the world. I drove home from her office with the list on the passenger seat where the divorce papers would sit 6 months later, and I thought about what she had said. This is not going to resolve with a conversation. I had known that somewhere below the level of conscious thought for a long time. But knowing something below the surface and allowing yourself to know it fully are 2 entirely different experiences. And the drive home from Patricia Holt's office was where those 2 things finally merged. I had to act, carefully, quietly, and without tipping my hand. The house on Elmwood Drive looked the same when I pulled into the driveway. Blue shutters, wraparound porch, the rows along the back fence not yet visible from the front, but there, always there, doing its slow, patient work of growing. I sat in the car for a moment before going in. Marcus's car was not in the driveway, which meant I had time, and time was the most important resource I had. I went inside and I began to build my case. Gerald Sims, the forensic accountant, met with me that Thursday. He had an office above a dry cleaner on Merchant Street, small and almost aggressively unremarkable. Beige walls, beige carpet, a potted plant of indeterminate species that was either very healthy or very convincingly fake. He was a small, precise man in his mid-50s with reading glasses on a chain and the manner of someone who had spent decades looking at numbers that other people hoped he wouldn't find. I brought him everything I had: bank statements from the joint accounts going back 18 months, copies of the mortgage documents, the property appraisal from Brenda's folder, the household expense records I kept in a spreadsheet out of habit. He spread them across his desk in a way that reminded me of Patricia Holt, the same careful, clinical arrangement of evidence, and he looked at them for a long time without speaking. "You manage your finances carefully," he said, which was not a question. "I always have," I said. "Good." He tapped one of the bank statements. "That makes this easier." He looked up. "Can you tell me the date range during which you first became concerned about irregular activity?" I told him. He made notes. He asked questions. Careful, specific questions about particular transactions, about who had access to which accounts, about whether Marcus managed any household expenses independently. I answered everything. When I mentioned the cash payments Marcus had started making, Gerald's pen paused for half a second, which I was already learning to read as his version of a raised eyebrow. "How long has he been using cash for regular expenses?" he asked. "About 2 months, as far as I can tell." "Approximately when did you first notice the folder in the supply closet?" 6 weeks ago." He wrote something and underlined it. "I'll need 96 hours, he said, possibly less." He needed 62. He called me on a Saturday morning, which told me he had found something significant enough that it couldn't wait until Monday, and asked me to come in that afternoon. I told Marcus I was meeting Diane for lunch. I drove to Merchant Street and climbed the stairs above the dry cleaner and sat down across from Gerald Sims's organized desk, and he laid out what he had found with the same quiet precision with which he did everything. The joint savings account, the one Marcus and I had been contributing to for 5 years, the one I had thought of as our emergency fund, our future, had been systematically reduced over the preceding 14 months. Not dramatically, not in large withdrawals that would have triggered alerts or caught my attention during my monthly review. Slowly, $200 here, $300 there, transferred always to the same external account, an account that was not mine, not a household account, not a business account Gerald could identify. Over 14 months, $9,400 had left our joint savings. The transfers are structured to stay below reporting thresholds, Gerald said. Not obviously so, not in a way that suggests professional fraud, but the pattern is consistent enough to be intentional. Whose account are they going to? I asked. He had traced it as far as he could without subpoena power, which was far enough. The receiving account was a personal savings account held at a regional bank. It was not in Marcus's name. It was in Brenda Calloway's name. I sat with that for a moment. I had prepared myself, in the way you prepare yourself for things you already know are coming, for something like this. I had told myself in the drive over that whatever Gerald had found would not surprise me. And I was right that it did not surprise me in the factual sense. Some part of my nervous system had already processed this possibility and made its peace with it. But there is a difference between knowing something is likely and sitting across a desk from a man with reading glasses on a chain while he shows you 14 months of your own money moving quietly out of your life into your mother-in-law's bank account. The knowledge lands differently when it has a number on it. $9,400. Not an abstraction, a real sum with a real destination, transferred while I slept beside my husband and trusted the ground beneath me. "Is this enough?" I asked Patricia Holt when I called her from my car in the parking lot behind Merchant Street. "It's a strong start," she said. "Has any attempt been made to forge your signature or alter the deed?" "I'm still checking." "Keep checking. And Clara," she paused, "have you decided what you want the outcome to be?" I looked through the windshield at the backs of the buildings on Merchant Street, the fire escapes and dumpsters, and the unremarkable rear view of other people's ordinary lives. "I want my house," I said. "I want my money back, and I want them to know that I know." "In that order?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said, "in exactly that order." I lived with what I knew for 3 more weeks without showing it. This was the hardest part, not the discovery, not the legal preparation, not even the long, sleepless nights working through scenarios and contingencies in the dark. The hardest part was sitting at Sunday dinners across from Brenda, watching her ladle soup and refill wine glasses and say, "Marcus tells me work has been stressful lately, dear. You must take care of yourself." I'm responding normally, keeping my face neutral and my voice steady and my hands loose in my lap when every instinct I had was screaming. I had learned, over 7 years of managing Brenda's small cruelties, how to compose my face. I had become, without ever intending to, very good at the specific performance of not reacting. It was a skill I had resented developing and now deployed with surgical precision. During those 3 weeks, I did 3 things. I met with Patricia Holt twice more. We filed a quiet inquiry with the county recorder's office to confirm that no altered deed had been filed. It hadn't, which meant the quitclaim draft had not yet been used, which meant we were ahead of whatever timeline Brenda had in mind. Patricia also advised me to document every unusual interaction, which I did in a running note on my phone. Dates, times, exact words, context. The note grew longer than I wanted it to. I also, during those 3 weeks, made a financial decision that would prove to be the most important practical move of the entire situation. Marcus and I had a joint credit card, the household card, used for groceries, utilities, the regular expenses of a shared life. The primary cardholder was me. Marcus was an authorized user. There was a second card on the account that I had never canceled, one issued years earlier when Brenda had needed to make a large purchase for a family event, and I had, in a moment of goodwill that now seemed almost comically naive, added her as a temporary additional user. The card was still active. Brenda still had it. On a Wednesday afternoon in late June, after a call with Patricia in which we confirmed the legal strategy was ready to move forward, I called the credit card company and requested 3 things: a full statement of recent charges on the secondary card, a change to the account's primary contact number, and a temporary spending freeze on the secondary card, pending review of unauthorized charges. The customer service representative was helpful and efficient. It took 11 minutes. I noted the time. I noted everything. Then I waited. The confrontation I had been planning, mapping, preparing for, the controlled, strategic, Patricia-approved confrontation, was not the confrontation I ultimately had. Real life has a way of doing that. You build the plan and sharpen the edges and set the timing, and then the other person moves first, on their own schedule, and you have to decide in the space of a single breath whether to follow the plan or respond to the reality. Brenda moved first on a Sunday afternoon. We were at her house for the standing weekly dinner. The rosemary chicken again, the antibacterial smell, the television murmuring in the next room. It was a warm afternoon and the kitchen windows were open, and the air coming through them was heavy and sweet with whatever was blooming in her garden. And I sat at that familiar table and thought, the last time. I am here for the last time. We had finished eating. The plates were cleared. Marcus was in the living room, and I was in the kitchen doorway, and Brenda was at the sink, rinsing the serving dish. And she said, without turning around, in the particular conversational tone she used when she was about to say something that was not actually conversational at all, "I've been thinking, dear, about the house." My hands were still. "What about it?" "Marcus and I had a conversation last week." She turned off the tap and dried her hands on a kitchen towel with slow, deliberate movements, the kind of deliberateness that is itself a form of performance. "About the future, about what makes sense, practically speaking, for the family." She turned and looked at me with the expression I had seen on her face at my desk, at the Sunday dinners, in 100 small moments I had cataloged and finally understood. The expression of someone who has decided the territory is already theirs. "You've worked so hard, Clara. You've built a beautiful life. But I think we all know that the current arrangement, the house being in both your names, given the circumstances, isn't sustainable." I looked at her. I kept my voice very even. "What circumstances?" She tilted her head slightly, a gesture of patient sympathy that made my stomach tighten. "Darling, you and Marcus have been struggling for months. I see it. Any mother would see it. And I think, for everyone's peace of mind, it would be wise to formalize some arrangements. Before things become," she searched for the word with an expression of careful delicacy, "complicated." "Before they become complicated," I repeated. "I've had a document drawn up," she said. "Nothing dramatic, simply a clarification of the property situation. Marcus has already reviewed it." She moved to the counter and opened a drawer, casually, as though she were reaching for a serving spoon, and withdrew a manila folder. Not the one from my supply closet, a new one, thicker. "I just need your signature on a few pages." She held the folder out to me. I did not take it. For a moment, the kitchen was completely still. The open windows, the sweetness from the garden, the faint sound of the television from the living room, where my husband was sitting while his mother asked me to sign away my home. "Brenda," I said, "I need to ask you something." She waited, the folder still extended. "How much of our joint savings have you transferred to your personal account in the last 14 months? The folder stayed in the air between us for 2 more seconds. Then something happened to her face, a fractional shift, so controlled that someone who had not been watching carefully for years might have missed it. But I had been watching carefully. I had been watching nothing else. "I don't know what your—" $9,400, I said. 14 months. The receiving account is registered at First Regional Bank. The account number ends in 7742. I paused. "Shall I tell you the transfer dates, or do you already know them?" Brenda lowered the folder. She set it on the counter beside her, very carefully, and she looked at me with an expression that was no longer warm or patient or performing any form of concern at all. It was the first time in 7 years that I had seen her face without its social architecture. Underneath it, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman whose plan had run into an obstacle, recalculating. "You've been investigating me," she said. "I've been protecting myself," I said, which is something I should have done years earlier. I walked to the kitchen doorway and said, without raising my voice, "Marcus." A pause. Then, "Yeah?" "Come in here, please." Another pause. Longer. Waited. And then his footsteps in the hallway, and he appeared in the kitchen doorway, and he looked at his mother, and then at me, and then at the folder on the counter, and his face did the thing I had watched it do in our kitchen the evening I found the quitclaim draft. The careful assembly of neutral expression, 2 seconds too late. "I think," I said, "that we need to have a conversation." What happened in that kitchen over the next 40 minutes was not the conversation any of us had prepared for. Brenda tried, initially, to reframe. She was skilled at reframing. It was perhaps her greatest talent, the ability to take a factual situation and rebuild it around a different center so that the same events meant something entirely different. The transfers were not transfers. They were temporary loans that she had always intended to repay. The property appraisal was not preparation for a deed. It was, she said, something she had commissioned for estate planning purposes, because at her age one thought about these things. The folder of documents was not coercion. It was a practical suggestion offered out of love that I was catastrophizing. She said catastrophizing with the gentle inflection of a woman who has used that word about the same person many times before to many people in conversations she assumed would never be verified. "I'm not catastrophizing," I said. "I have documentation." "Documentation," she repeated, as though the word itself were a slight. "You've been building a case against your own family." "I've been building a case against people who were planning to take my home," I said. "Whether they're family is a separate question." Marcus stood against the kitchen wall throughout most of this, in the posture I had come to know so well, shoulders slightly folded, eyes moving between his mother and me, contributing nothing of substance. He said, "Mom, maybe," twice, and was talked over both times. He said, "Clara, I understand you're upset," once, which was possibly the least useful thing he could have offered, and which I addressed with a single look that stopped that sentence from completing itself. Then Brenda said the thing she had apparently decided was her final position, delivered with the composure of someone who genuinely believed it would land. "Marcus is my son. This house, whatever the paperwork says, is built on the foundation of this family, and families take care of each other. If you can't understand that, then perhaps the problem has always been you." The kitchen was quiet. Marcus looked at the floor. I looked at Brenda, and I felt the cold clarity that Patricia Holt had given me sitting in her office. Not anger, not hurt, not any of the hot, destabilizing emotions that Brenda had been counting on to make me act impulsively. Just a clean, lucid understanding of exactly what I was dealing with and exactly what I was going to do about it. "Marcus," I said, "look at me." He looked up. "I want you to understand something. I am not asking you to choose between me and your mother. That is a framing your mother is offering you, and it is not the real question." I kept my voice steady and even. "The real question is whether you knew about the transfers." Silence. "The real question," I said, "is whether you let the appraiser into our home knowing what it was for." Silence. "The real question," I said, "is whether you reviewed the documents in that folder before tonight." He said nothing for a long time. Outside, a car passed on the street. The refrigerator made its low, steady hum. And then Marcus said, very quietly, "I was trying to keep everyone happy." Which was, in the end, the only honest thing he said to me that day, and also the confirmation of everything. I left Brenda's house at 7:38 that evening. I drove home without music, without the radio, without calling anyone. I parked in the driveway of the house on Elmwood Drive, and I sat for a moment and looked at the blue shutters in the fading evening light and the porch I had painted and the roses I could not see from this angle but knew were there, tight and climbing and persistent. Then I went inside and I called Patricia Holt and I said, "We're moving forward." "All of it?" she said. "All of it," I said. She paused, not hesitantly, but thoughtfully, the pause of someone choosing the right tool for the next phase of work. "I'll file the formal complaint with the Financial Crimes Unit on Monday morning, the property protection order the same day, and the letter to your husband's attorney by end of business." "Good," I said. "Clara," she said, "I want you to be prepared. Once we file, they will respond. Brenda will respond. Your husband will respond. Things will move quickly and not always cleanly." "I know," I said. "Are you ready for that?" I looked around the kitchen, the counter where I had stood with my coffee every morning for 7 years, the window over the sink with the small clay pot of herbs, the table where I had eaten alone the night I found Marcus's car in the wrong parking garage. "I've been ready," I said, "for longer than I realized." Patricia filed everything Monday morning: the financial complaint naming Brenda, the forensic report from Gerald, the property protection order on the house. By noon, Marcus had already retained an attorney, which told me the Sunday dinner confrontation had been less spontaneous than it appeared. I moved into Diane's spare room. Not because I was afraid to stay in the house, legally it was mine, Patricia had confirmed that, but because I needed distance from 7 years of shared walls and accumulated silences. Diane made terrible coffee and asked no unnecessary questions, and every night I sat at her kitchen table and worked through documents and felt, steadily, like myself again. Brenda's response came through the family, as I knew it would. Aunts called, cousins texted, church friends sent messages about misunderstandings and private conversations and the importance of keeping things within the family. Each one carried her fingerprints, the same framing, the same careful language, distributed over a weekend of phone calls I could almost hear her making. I let every call go to voicemail. Except Marcus. He called from a number I didn't recognize because he knew I wouldn't answer his own. I picked up anyway. "The money was supposed to be temporary," he said. "I thought I could put it back before you noticed." I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. "You thought you could take money from our account, move it to your mother, and return it before I ran the numbers. I know how it sounds." "How does it sound to you?" I said. "Say it out loud." A long pause. "It sounds like I betrayed you." "Yes," I said, "it does." I wasn't angry, not the hot, destabilizing kind he was bracing for. I was finished, which is a different and quieter thing entirely. "I'm not interested in maintaining the version of us anymore, Marcus. I see clearly what we are. That's all." He said Mom, like a reflex, like a boy invoking the only authority that had ever mattered to him. "I know," I said. "That's exactly why we're here." I ended the call and went back to work. The divorce settlement took 6 weeks. Marcus didn't contest it. The forensic report, the transfer records, the quitclaim draft found in my own home made a contested filing an unattractive option for everyone. Brenda retained her own attorney and settled the financial complaint without admitting wrongdoing, which was the minimum required to keep the matter civil rather than criminal. She repaid every dollar. With interest. Patricia had asked for interest, and Gerald's documentation was precise enough that the figure was not disputable. I sat in Patricia's office the afternoon the papers were signed and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't fully known was held. "It's done?" I asked. "It's done," she said. "You came prepared. That made all the difference." Diane called the following evening while I was sitting on the back porch of the house on Elmwood Drive, back home for the first time in 6 weeks, the climbing rose in full bloom along the fence, deep pink and extravagant in the late light. "Clara," she said, "are you somewhere you can talk?" She told me about the banquet. The night before, the same night the settlement was finalized, as though Brenda had timed it deliberately, Magnolia House, 14 guests, champagne, Marcus sitting beside a soft-spoken woman named Melissa, already wearing a ring, while Brenda stood and toasted. Sometimes God closes one door so the right one can finally open. And she had put the $2,000 bill on my card, the card I had frozen 3 months ago. My phone rang at 10:47, Brenda's number. I let it ring twice, dried my hands on a kitchen towel, and answered. "The card isn't processing," she said, her voice stripped of every performance I had ever watched her give. "There must be an error. I need you to—" "There's no error," I said. "The card was frozen 3 months ago. My attorney will be very interested in a $2,000 charge at Magnolia House." I paused. "How's the champagne?" Silence. Dense and recalculating. "You planned this," she said. "I protected myself," I said. "You keep confusing the two." I kept my voice perfectly even. "Pay the bill with your own money, Brenda. You have $9,400 that came back into your account recently. I'm sure you can manage." I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, in the quiet of the house that was entirely, legally, finally mine. Then I turned off the light and went to bed and slept, for the first time in months, without waking at 3 a.m, with a chest full of unnamed dread. 6 months later, I was sitting on the wraparound porch with a cup of coffee. Good coffee, the kind I made for myself now, exactly the strength I liked, watching the morning light move across the garden. The climbing rose had finished its summer bloom and was settling into autumn, the canes bare and patient along the fence, already preparing for next year. The DA's office had declined to pursue criminal charges against Brenda. Patricia had told me without apology that outcome had always been uncertain, and the civil resolution had been complete. The money was back, the house was protected, the record existed. Sometimes that is what justice looks like. Not a courtroom, not a sentence, but a paper trail that follows a person permanently, and a door that closes quietly and does not reopen. Marcus had moved into an apartment on the other side of the city. He sent one email 3 weeks after the settlement that was 2 paragraphs long and said, in careful, attorney-reviewed language, that he was sorry and that he hoped I could eventually understand that he had been caught between 2 people he loved. I read it once. I did not respond. There was nothing in it that required a response. It was an explanation, not an accountability, and I had learned to tell the difference. Brenda, I did not hear from directly again. Through Diane, in the way that information travels through families whether you want it to or not, I learned that Melissa and Marcus were still together, that Brenda had introduced her proudly at every possible occasion, and that the family had largely reorganized itself around this new configuration, as families do. I felt nothing particular about this. I had not married the Calloway family in order to belong to it. I had built a life, and the life was still here, and I was still in it. The promotion to regional director had been finalized 2 months after the divorce. 12 people reporting to me, a corner office with decent light, work that required everything I had and returned it with interest. I stayed late sometimes, not out of obligation, but because I was genuinely absorbed. And I drove home in the dark to the house on Elmwood Drive, and I unlocked the front door, and the house received me the way it always had, quietly, solidly, without condition. Diane came for dinner on a Friday night in October, and we sat on the porch after eating, with wine, and the kind of conversation that requires no performance. And at some point she said, "Do you miss it? Any of it?" I thought about it honestly. I thought about the Sunday dinners and the rosemary chicken and Marcus's 2-strong coffee in the mornings, and the years when I had believed that keeping the peace was the same as having it. "I miss who I thought we were," I said. "I don't miss finding out we weren't." Diane nodded and refilled her glass, and we sat in the comfortable quiet of people who understand each other. and the October air was cool and smelled of leaves and the last of the garden, and the house behind us was lit and warm and entirely mine. That was enough. That was, it turned out, more than